Hello, this is Geraldine, the Living Water Quilter and BERNINA Ambassador, and this is the Essential Ruler Quilting Challenge, week number 3. Let's look at the blade design. So here's the design. We're using a part of the ruler to create this. Again, there are instructions on how to mark your quilt sandwich. You want to make sure that you mark a line at the top and at the bottom. So far, we have been stitching in a vertical format. We're going to change things up a little bit and stitch in a horizontal format. This is the curve that we're going to use for this design. And we're going to use one reference line on the ruler to help us make this design in conjunction with the reference line on the quilt sandwich. And the reference line we're going to use is this reference line that is perpendicular to the edge of the curve. It's a dashed line with red and white markings. Let me show you the curve that this is on this edge of the ruler. As I put it next to it and I line up the reference line right here in the middle of this curve on the top, once I slide it over, can you see the curve? There it is, right there. This is why we need a reference line at the top and the bottom, because we're going to start by putting our needle right here into the fabric, making sure our reference line is right on top. The one on the ruler is right on top of the reference line on what we marked on our quilt sandwich. Then we're going to stitch from the top reference line to the bottom and stop. Once we stop, all we have to do is slide the ruler down until the reference line, this horizontal reference line, is touching the reference line on the fabric and the ruler is touching the foot. When we do, we get the next arc. Did you see that? Was that too fast? Again, the foot is here. We stopped with the needle down. We're going to stitch up to the top reference line. Once we do, we stop with the needle down. We slide the ruler up. Once we slide the ruler up and the reference line is on the ruler is in line with the reference line on the quilt sandwich, you can see the 1/4 inch stitching from this side. Again, the ruler foot is here, the needle is down, you're ready to stitch again. You stitch from the top to the bottom and stop, and you're going to keep doing that up and down. Every time I slide it up and down, I can now stitch, slide it up and stitch, slide it down and stitch, back and forth. And we do that with both of the designs, the blade design and the shark teeth. We just get a different look because we're using a different curve. So here we are. I'm already in the middle of stitching. Again, I'm stitching left to right instead of top to bottom, vertical stitching. This is horizontal stitching, left to right. Notice how I slide the ruler up, I stitch down. I slide the ruler down, making sure the reference line on the ruler is on top of the reference line I marked on the quilt sandwich. And you just keep going. It's a fast, easy design, not very complicated, but it gives a beautiful texture that can be used in multiple applications, in borders, in sashing, in art quilts, all kinds of ways you can use this design. And this is another technique where we use a portion of the curve. We're not using the entire curve in one full direction. We're using half of the curve in one direction and half of the curve in another direction. You can stitch them as close or as far apart as you like. I recommend you stitch them close like I've done here so that you can practice the technique. And it's easy to stitch. That's the final result. Now, this is what it can look like when you're done. When you stitch out, look in the center how I stitched out the blades and the shark teeth on 1/2 of a fat quarter. I had a fat quarter, I cut it in half, and I stitched half of that with the blades and half with the shark teeth. I hope you enjoyed this design. Isn't that a fast and easy way to put some curves in the quilt? I love techniques like this that are very easy, don't require a lot of steps. Some are a little bit more complicated, but not this one. Let's look at the next design. And it's a very similar design, but it's using a different part of the curve ruler, but the same technique. Let's look at shark teeth. This is very similar to the blade design. We still have to mark 2 horizontal reference lines to make this design. It's the same technique, but we're using a different part of the ruler. For the blade design, we use this part of the ruler, this curve. For shark teeth, we're using this curve. We're using the same technique where we're taking the reference line on the ruler, this horizontal line that's perpendicular to the curve, and placing it on the reference line we marked on our sandwich. Do you see that curve right there? That's right. All we have to do, let's start at the very end, is place our foot here with the needle down, making sure that this reference line is right on top of the reference line we've drawn on our quilt sandwich, and we stitch up and stop. Once we stop, we slide the ruler down until it touches the foot, making sure that this horizontal line on the ruler is lining up with the line in our quilt sandwich, and then we stitch from here down. Then we slide it up and we stitch from here up. So it's back and forth, just like the previous design. Slide it up, stitch up, slide it down, stitch down, back and forth, back and forth. So we're starting here, horizontal line on the reference line on our quilt sandwich. We're going to stitch from the bottom up, slide the ruler down, then we're going to stitch from the top down, slide the ruler up, so forth and so on. Now you can position these rows as close as you want or as far apart as you want to get a different look. It's certainly up to you. Let's see how this is stitched out on the BERNINA Q20 sit down. I stitched both designs, shark teeth and the blade, on 1/2 of a fat quarter. The top half is shark teeth and the bottom half are blades, but it's the same technique, using the horizontal reference line that's perpendicular to the curve and stitching it back and forth. So I'm positioning the ruler and I'm going to make sure I position my needle on the reference line, and as I stitch up and down, all I have to do is slide the ruler back and forth. So I'm going to bring the foot down and then the needle down and bring the bobbin thread up to the top. Pull both threads, put them underneath the foot, eliminate some of the slack, and then stitch a couple of stitches in place and go up to the top and stop on the reference line on the fabric. Then slide the ruler up and down, always placing the reference line on the ruler on top of the reference line I marked on my quilt sandwich. And as a reminder, remember when we're stitching curves, we want a higher stitch count, stitches per inch, for a nice smooth curve. And for my curves, I preset my BERNINA to stitch at 12 stitches per inch. You can decide what works best for you. That's how quickly you can stitch that out. And now we're stitching the last row. I was able to fit, 5 rows on this. And notice I'm stitching left to right, and I'm positioning it so that you can see it on the camera. And again, when we're stitching curves with the ruler on the outside of the ruler, the perimeter, sometimes the ruler might slip off. So just remember your technique. It's light pressure down and light pressure toward the foot to make sure the ruler consistently has contact with the ruler foot. When you're stitching on an outside curve, sometimes you might go off the ruler. And this is how it looks finished. It's a fun, quick design. I recommend stitching out not only the smaller quilt sandwich, but also the larger on a colorful fabric, and use blending thread. It's nice to see the difference between how a design looks with blending thread and contrasting thread, and also on a larger surface area. So when I practice, I like to practice with purpose and try different things so that I have a way to help me make decisions for future projects, because I've done it before. And so if I've stitched out shark teeth with blending thread and with contrasting thread, I can see the difference and potentially see how it might look on a later quilt.